All right, and we're back.
All right, Shrey, what's this about utilities in America?
Oh, so yeah, there was this really fascinating article I was reading today, where basically the city of Calgary owns its own utility service,
Hmm.
and it's like a national public one, and it's been going around gobbling up other utility services. So the state of Maine, which has it fully privatized, is trying to renationalize their utility service, and the city of Calgary is not having it. They put 3 million in marketing efforts to stop Maine from doing this, which is awesome. and, and there's an article in the Calgary Herald today from the concerned residents and citizens of Maine.
So true.
And it's amazing because if you look at the comments, all the comments for the Calgary Herald are like, "This is why socialism failed. Those poor liberal elites in Maine are."
Yeah. Is this kind of like the Walmart effect where it dominated the market so much that it managed to consume the market in itself, and like other business can't succeed because one business has done so well in the market?
Well, yeah, it's just like the nationalized Calgary utility is just really good, and the privatized systems in Maine are so bad. They're rated as the lowest or the second lowest in all of the U.S. for reliability. And so,
Damn, and I don't hear anything about Maine's utilities being bad.
Well, you don't
This
hear
just
anything
shows how
about
biased the liberal media
you don't
is,
hear
I
anything
guess.
about Maine in general. It's not a very
Yeah, well, I hear about the Maine Squatch all the time.
Maine has zero big cities. It was only added to the Union as as separate from Massachusetts so that they could add a slave state, and they didn't want to unbalance the ratio.
well, you know what? Power to Calgary.
Yeah.
Power to Calgary for doing this. Here's the top comment for the article about this. Just another case
Case
of
of
socialism.
socialism failing, as it always does and always will. Eventually, socialists run out of using other people's money. In this
So
case,
true.
Maine dumped on Alberta fossil fuels and now wants a free pass and the NMAX dividend to pay for their poor planning.
Yes, sir.
Socialism
guy's so
Socialism fails when private industry is bad.
Yeah. This is well, thinking of how socialism will always fail. They say it fails, yet how am I living the socialist dream right now, where I have people painting my house, and because of this, they're providing actual real work, and I am the good old socialist who is now recording a podcast in the fucking garage. They said it fails, yet why am I winning so much?
So true. All right. So, let's start with the state of the housing market. Mississauga, 2 housing units built or start building over the past month, while population grows at, I assume, a rate of higher than 2 people a month.
2 people born in Mississauga. They both have houses.
Now, the city of Mississauga has commented that this is technically not true because they're building a lot of high rises at the same time. And so those housing starts, the high rises, come up at certain months, and these 2 are coming up at this month. So amortized over a couple months would be different. However, the city of Toronto has, I think it was like 1,000 housing starts over the last month, and they're also building a ton of high rises.
Yeah, so it sounds like they're just coping.
Yeah, I feel like it sounds like a little bit of cope. I mean, I get the number being lower, but 2, like you're practically losing houses at this point.
Yeah.
Probably more than 2 houses collapsed in
Yeah.
Mississauga.
More than 2 houses burned down or were demolished, at least, you know?
Yeah, like rat infestations that mean they have to rebuild it or something. Like, I don't know.
Right, but
There has to be.
This is just a spectacular example of the general trend in Canada, where housing has fallen radically behind population growth metrics. So, Shrey, I believe you had something to share with the class on this topic.
Yes, I sent a couple of charts. I hope this will be edited in. If not, well, good luck. But
I'll note it down. I'll try to remember to edit it in.
so basically, in the 90s, under the first truly neoliberal Prime Minister of Canada, Jean Chrétien, they changed it up so that before 90s, the CMHC, or the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, would build a ton of housing. But because of the recession in the 90s, the Canadian government truly stopped or tried to slow down the building of public housing. It's incredible where if you see the house prices and the rent prices, both of them start shooting up in the 90s, coincidentally. And
Yeah.
there are certain spikes where they built houses suddenly because of economic pressures. But overall, I think it was around 2011, 2012, where they just stopped building houses altogether, or very, very, very few, which is when housing prices really shot up.
It's
I
really
mean,
funny.
I guess it's tough to compete in a market when one of your competitors fundamentally does not need to make loads of industrial profit for no work. You know, it's they can just build houses and just leave them be with no profit instead of, you know, landlords who desperately need more.
Now, you say they cut social housing because of recession, right?
Mm.
It's really funny to me how Keynesianism saved capitalism in like the Greatest Generation era, right? And the new generation of neoliberal elites is just convinced that they're just smarter than FDR and they're smarter than Eisenhower and stuff, right? They've got this all figured out. They shouldn't spend during a recession. They should cut. And I guess we're all paying the price of their incredible hubris, you know?
Yeah, the Gilded Era happened, and it was
Yeah.
like, oh, what happens if we cut everything? And then we got the Great Depression,
Yeah.
and built our way out of the Great Depression by, like, a large state intervention, where the state took over a lot of function and just ended up being huge. And then we were just like, oh, but we should just start cutting the state again. And then inequality's up as, like, high as it's ever fucking been.
Right.
And like housing is completely out of reach for the vast majority of people, and we're like, but what if we just, you know, give it one more cut, just
And I
one
guess
more
it's
little.
It's hard to tell. Was the abandonment of Keynesianism just like a mistake, an innocent accident, or is Naomi Klein correct? Was it a deliberate exploitation of the oil crisis to kill off the organs of the state that existed to help people in exchange of just maintaining the organs of the state that allow profit to exist, like, you know, the police and the army?
I mean, the oil crisis was huge, right? Like that's where everything kind of went off. Like I know housing interest rates. If you think interest rates of 4.5% is bad, the oil crisis interest rates go up to 16%.
Yeah.
Back in the
And inflation was crazy, and the economic growth was stagnating, right? But the Keynesian consensus would have been to invest government reserves in oil development, right? Because the U.S. sits on one of the largest shale deposits on Earth. I think it actually is the largest, right? It's not like there wasn't oil to extract, right? It was more like I think Naomi Klein's argument was that the crisis was seized upon to implement Chicago school doctrines of like economic development, right? The neoliberal turn was not like the actual correct one, the correct solution. They were just looking for an excuse to implement it at some point, and the oil crisis was just the first excuse that came up.
I think one of you mentioned inflation rates and all of that, and how they used to be high and now they're lower. And another comment on that is, I was thinking about, shit, we're like slightly off of housing at this point, but you know, such is life of a basement dwelling podcaster. Is that a big part of the neoliberal reform was essentially trying to say, oh, we need low inflation, under the idea that if prices are barely changing, then things need to change less. People will always be able to afford around the same amount of things. But I think this had two unintended consequences. Well, one being that just inflation went down to 2%, and then the wage increases went down to 0%. So people were still losing out to inflation. It just became slightly less noticeable over like a short year span, which means that people feel less pressure and it just sneaks up on them slower. The other being, inflation is high. Like it's up there. So clearly this whole, oh, we're keeping inflation in check and we can keep this going. Like, inflation has been up, and it hasn't just been a short little burst. It's staying there. So it seems that all the reforms done to keep inflation down just aren't really doing that well anymore.
Well, I will comment Canada's done pretty good with inflation overall.
We've done all right.
Like inflation in the UK is like around 7-8%, which is insane. Right now in Canada, it's 3.4% was the latest numbers.
Yeah.
It's higher than 2%, but it's
I thought we were at like 5.
No, it's went down. It's went down.
Out of 8,
yeah, I think it dropped this month. Like this quarter is down. There's a lot of countries that are doing much worse than Canada, like in the global south. Like Argentina's at like 100-something% inflation right now, year over year.
Not too shabby.
But like, yeah, I mean, it could be worse, but that doesn't mean it couldn't be better, right?
Yeah.
And also,
like France is worse, the UK is worse. But there's also countries which are doing better. Like China is doing way better than us.
That was another thing I was going to say. With the oil crisis, we decided to like cut a bunch of stuff. We could have done infrastructure projects like they would have done in the Keynesian state, and we decided. Well, the West in general has decided not to. Guess who did decide to do that? China.
Yeah.
And guess who is growing way better than us and innovating way more than us? Also China.
The Chinese, right? But it's like a big part of the neoliberal turn, and one reason I'm skeptical of inflation numbers, whether they're high or low, was reframing how the government measures bad things in order to make the neoliberal turn seem less shocking, right? Like reframing unemployment numbers and unemployment targets from being able-bodied people out of work, with the goal being 0% unemployment, to anyone who is looking for a job and is not employed, and the new goal being 10%, right? That allows them to goose the unemployment numbers, and it allowed them to say, look, unemployment's way down since we sold off all state assets, right?
Yeah.
And then there's also inflation is tracked very strangely since then, right? There's like, the basket of goods inflation model, right? But they can change what's in the basket of goods. It's not like the basket of goods is static or constant. Right?
No, but
this brings me back to my point of, I think the eggs are getting smaller, and I don't have any evidence to back this up, but they feel smaller in my hand.
Maybe you just gained weight.
I have, but my hands haven't gotten that much bigger. I'm not taking a GH or anything.
This may be telling on myself a little bit, but I know it's bad practice to talk about other podcasts while you're podcasting. You shouldn't make marketing competition, but highly recommend the Stats Canada podcast, where they actually explain all of these in detail and go into the basket of goods and how it all works.
Yeah. So what's the takeaway from that, Trey? Am I wrong about how the basket of goods works?
Like, it's pretty static. It doesn't change too much. It is pretty static. Of course, when technology changes and when people are looking for changes, it does change. But overall, it seems to be pretty static.
Yeah. Well,
of course, this could be a Canadian concept and not something which is all over. I know that's another fact, but
yeah, I feel like Canada has some weird metrics in all spheres of things, right? Like our humidity metric is unique in the world.
Yeah.
But also like, what was I going to say?
I want a Borat measurement.
Canada and
bowl of
shrinkflation.
rice a day.
Canada is the home of shrinkflation on the topic of eggs getting smaller.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Shrinkflation, aquaflation, shellflation are the three Canadian born.
Yeah. What was the one again where that I always talk about, where it's just like there's always the inflation where things get more expensive, the shrinkflation where things get smaller. But I got some tomato soup recently.
Yeah.
And I ate that my entire childhood. It's been like a few years, but I know my tomato soup, all right? That shit slaps. I love it. It sucked. And like just visually, it looked brown and like it just did not do anything.
They probably added a bunch of water and increased the air in the can or something.
Yeah, the flavor was worse. Like I don't think I bought a different product. I'm pretty sure it was the same. I know chicken noodle soup is like you get it and there's like 2 peas of chicken in the entire can, unless you buy the can that's $6, which used to be like $2 for the same one, but now the standard small can that's $2 is awful.
Yep.
And I still see like basket of goods and it's like can of chicken noodle soup $2, and I'm like that can is still a can and it's still chicken noodle soup, but I'm Spectacle.
Yeah. You're Spectacle indeed. All right. Next up, tech geniuses reinvent the age of sail. The Sea-Wing sailing ship project. Spencer, would you like to present this one?
Oh, shoot. I meant to actually save this to have me reading the article at the end. But it appears that some tech geniuses that are working to innovate to save the environment have come up with a way to make boats approximately 40% more efficient going across the ocean. what you have to do to get these 40% gains is strap a giant kite to it.
So this is
And
just like
these giant kites will harness the natural power of wind to pull or overall propel the boat in a forward direction towards their goal.
Now, couldn't we increase the efficiency of these kites by building poles out of the ship's chassis and attaching the kites directly to it instead of to a string out front?
But I don't see how that could work, because then clearly these kites would only be able to face straight forwards, and what if the wind is going the opposite direction? I think we need some more innovation on this idea.
Well, what if we made the sails triangular so they're able to capture wind from multiple directions?
I'm
That's
no
insane. You should go into computing, I think.
I'm no wind expert, but I know Toronto struggles with wind. We have like wind turbines here which don't work. Is there like wind on the ocean?
That's
I
a
think
great
waves
question.
might block it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Thing
Incredible.
of wind on the ocean. You
Yeah.
guys ever see videos of just boats hitting waves in the middle of the ocean, and like our modern ships are getting tossed around like little rubber duckies? I can't imagine what it would be like for all those tech bro innovators in the 1800s who took little wooden dinghies across the entire ocean. That's insanity.
Well, the thing with tech bro innovators in the 1800s is that they actually invented stuff that was useful back then, like trains, right? And bicycles.
yeah.
They
And
weren't.
sailboats.
Yeah. Well, sailboats was not.
I
Sailboats,
mean, bigger.
Yeah.
Bigger, better sailboats.
Well, they invented steamboats, right? Which was the original.
Fuck.
Yeah, which is like were coal powered, and they were all right, you know. But it turns out they were destroying the world, which we are now learning, and
Yeah.
we might have to.
So we're literally ret-verning.
We're ret-verning to sail ships, folks.
Yeah.
So when are we doing our podcast from the sea where we go across the Atlantic in a wooden dinghy?
If we go across the sea, we're doing full Seawolf roleplay the entire time.
We're pretending to be in a U-boat. We're going to attack merchant shipping.
We're gonna DOS boot it.
Yeah, we're going to engage in commerce
We're gonna
raiding.
sink a U-boat with all of us stranded in it and repair it with planks of wood from
We're
the
gonna present
inside.
letters of marque to our enemies.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, wait. There was an impromptu article years ago that was like, we need to bring back privateering.
Oh, I did see that.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't know if you saw this, Spencer. National Interest, which was like some defense magazine, published an article that was like, we should bring back privateers in the next conflict. Like, the U.S. should issue letters of marque to pirates to attack Chinese ships.
Yes.
Yeah. Apparently,
I mean,
some
this is just like the whole trend of using mercenaries for war instead of any official army. That way, if you commit a ton of war crimes, it's the mercenaries' fault, and they can just file for bankruptcy.
I was reading a book about the history of the U.S. Navy recently, and in the early days, almost the entire Navy was just privateers. Because ideologically, it embodied the American entrepreneurial spirit to kick it to private industry to do all the fighting. They would just accept payment from private individuals and allow them to equip cannons on their private yachts and stuff. And then they would use those to, like, raid British merchant ships or something in the War of 1812.
This is what we need rich people doing again, is we need them strapping cannons to their boats and just getting into wars with each other in like a pirate thing.
I know there was a law that was introduced, I don't know if it was passed in the U.S., to look into seizing Russian oligarch ships because that was helping support the Russian state.
Yeah.
But, like, officially by the Navy or by private individuals just doing a citizen's arrests on Russian yachts?
I think officially, because this did happen, didn't it?
I don't know if it passed. I know they were talking about it very seriously in the U.S.
Yeah, this was one policy that absolutely blew my freaking mind. Also, we've accidentally started talking about the U.S. again. Shame on us. But this one I thought was absolutely hysterical because people were just like, oh, in order to stop the bad, we need to start taking the rich Russian people's assets. And then when rich, like, Americans are doing bad things, or, like, when American wars are going on, it's like, oh, you can't touch the rich people's assets. That would make you just as bad as them.
Well,
And
yeah, I think the general theory is more like if we do anything except grovel at the feet of rich people, they'll flee the country and take all their taxable assets with them, right?
Yeah.
Capital flight. But like the idea that rich people actually have a country that they are loyal to is obvious nonsense, right?
Yeah.
Like, and also like if capital flight were, and I'm not saying it's a zero risk, but if it were such a massive risk, every capitalist would just live in Monaco or something.
Yeah.
Like they wouldn't even live here.
There's still like some profit to be made.
Yeah.
So even if it's not a particularly high rate of profit, like it you still can get that profit. Therefore, it is still worth it to have business going on in that country. To not do it is just to take a loss.
Yeah.
Okay, so we reinvented sailing ships, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
What's next?
Spencer, did you have another funny article for us, or was the Sea Wing article the funny article?
Oh, I have. I can just seethe about something for like 5 minutes. You know.
Go ahead. I mean, we have other stuff we could talk about, but
Yeah. Well, we'll get to that
go
stuff.
off.
So this is a continuation on our getting social media sites to pay for hosting Canadian news on their social media. So we know that generally how people get their news at this point is by browsing social media, and they see the headlines, maybe they click on the article, they almost certainly don't, and then they kind of talk about it in the comments, and that draws engagement, so on and so forth. They keep on doing that, and that's kind of one of the core, like that's a bedrock of social media, is the fact that on top of getting some form of social engagement, what social media have done is they've adopted news. That way, if you leave social media, you don't really know how to get your news, which is an interesting thing. So, the bills being proposed, C-18, is trying to get social media to pay for the fact that they have adopted that function and news networks are closing down left and right. And the general goal of it is to pose news networks and social media as not necessarily being complementary to each other. There is some sort of beef in there that is causing news networks to close down, which may be true. I haven't looked at all the numbers. So I was watching a YouTube video this morning that I knew was going to make me angry. And I watched the YouTube video and I got angry. And one of my favorite moments in this, there's a couple things that I wanted to mention, was one, the host, the unnamed host, who you guys can probably find extremely easily if you try, said, oh, the Trudeau government seems to be on this wavelength of regulate, regulate, regulate. And all I could think was like, yes? Like, isn't like an absolute staple of what a state is supposed to do be regulating things? And also, everyone's complained about how the state has not managed to keep up with technology. And now that it's finally caught up to like 2010 and saying something about social media, people are suddenly going from, oh, why hasn't anything been done about social media and all the like damage it's been doing? And now it's like, oh, they can't just regulate that. The regulations are 1984. So I don't know if you guys have any particular takes on Trudeau's regulate, regulate, regulate.
Well, my take is that the news organizations that are being negatively affected by this, like the Toronto Star and stuff, are the same organizations that lobbied for it. They asked for this to happen, right? They asked for the government to crack down on social media sharing whatever and demanded that they share Canadian news or something like that. And now that these social media sites have just thrown up their hands and say, well, we just won't interact with this sphere, we'll just not show news to people, they're suddenly crying about it. You know, it's like, for once, the regulatory capture is hurting the people who captured it, you know?
Now, I do want to clarify one point. It's not that the media's not showing the news. The media's not showing the Canadian news. So they will continue to show foreign news to the to people if they look it up.
Yeah, I personally think this is just a bluff. Now, I guess Canadian news, not many people care about Canadian news, so maybe they will just go on and watch only American news, which kind of happens anyways. But like I said, one of the core bedrock pieces of social media is the fact that people are able to just get their news from that one stop. And if they can't do that, it will probably hurt the social media as people go elsewhere to find their news. So I think this is a bluff. I know in Australia they pulled all the news, and then 2 weeks later they just went, actually, like, after some deliberation they found a way to make it work, which I assume is going to happen here. The bill is a little vague, but such is life.
So the Canadian news will get really badly impacted. I am a bit terrified because Australians actually have a national identity. Canadians don't. So I am very worried that no one, like even less people, are going to pay attention to Canadian news because of this, unless the U.S. does the same thing, which I highly doubt.
I think we should do an episode at some point about the history of Canadian identity and how Anglo-Canadians have spent like 250 straight years being like, we're going to go back to America any day now, just temporarily embarrassed Americans in a sense. Like, America will cease to be a country any minute now and we can go home.
Yeah, no, but that's going to be a very long talk. I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on Canadian identity.
Yeah.
Well, I'll add on to this whole news thing with social media and say that very briefly they did mention, Post Media and the Toronto Star might merge, and then proceeded to just say nothing about it.
That's a pro wrestling tier headline. That's like two iconic rivals, the National Post and the Toronto Star, merging into a super team. That's crazy.
It's worth realizing it's not just the Toronto Star, right? It's not just National Post. Like Metroland, the guys who own Toronto Star, are like the entire group is massive. And then, or Torstar is just massive. Yeah. And then Post Media itself is huge. Like, I think it's like 80 or 90% of all Anglo publication pieces are either Post Media or Torstar.
In Canada.
Yeah, in Canada.
Now, Post Media isn't Post Media international? They do stuff in...
Well, I mean...
Right? Is it their Canadian branch of something international, or is that their international thing of which there's a Canadian branch? So, I forget.
Post Media is owned by, I believe, an American hedge fund.
Yeah.
But Post Media itself is pure Canadian, but they're owned by an American conglomerate.
Yeah. Tim Hortons style.
Tim Hortons is different. Tim Hortons was owned by a Brazilian conglomerate, but due to bad recent quarters, Brazil's given up most of it. So Tim Hortons might actually become independent again.
Well, that's something to look forward to.
Now, honestly, Shrey, you kind of dropped a segue in there of this is 80% of all news. And one thing I found absolutely crazy as I was making myself further angry by reading some of the comments was people saying that this is massive government overreach in literally 1984 when the government isn't even seizing it or anything. They're just saying oh, you guys should pay those guys over there. It's not even that hard on the government. So that's one thing. And also, we're so scared of the government owning anything, but if one company owns everything, that's not scary. It seems normal to us. So the government having just a sliver of investment in something is literally 1984. The government is going to get us all. But then if capital owns everything, that's just fine.
Right. I think that's because of I will say, the oil crisis that was deliberately done, right, to reduce public confidence in the government. But also, the government itself, through no conspiracy of its own, no deliberate conspiracy, did also delegitimize itself in the eyes of Americans in the late 20th century. And the whole stretch going from Watergate up to the end of the Reagan administration, right? This whole stretch of people going from thinking that the government is something that exists to serve them and is made up of the people to a public perception that the government is full of corrupt, insane bureaucrats who just want to steal public funds, right? So and then there's also the kind of perception that companies are kind of very slim, cut to the bone, shaving off all redundancies, that they're like inherently efficient, right? I think that the combination of those two perceptions are why boomers in particular are so allergic to state enterprises.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's that and the consumerization of everything, where people now see government more and more as a service provider versus a superstructure of some sort.
Yeah.
And so that leads to more people thinking then, okay, if something goes wrong, then how do we fix it specifically? By do they give us more? Do we reduce their power and give it to some private enterprise and so forth?
Mm-hmm. And I think also, if in like a sane structure where people are, really given more of a part of something, like one news network owning 80% of everything.
Like, that was an exaggeration.
Okay.
It's not
Okay. I thought sounds good. But one news
believable.
network.
Like, I would believe
it is believable. I when I was doing replacing stuff in gas stations for my job at one point, the only newspaper I ever saw anyone buy was The Sun, and there would be multiple people every hour, and I didn't see anyone touch another newspaper. That's a very small sample size, but still, like, the fact that it was probably multiple hundred for The Sun to 0 means that, like, there's got to be something in there. I think it's such a big merger. In a sane structure, there would be some discussion of, do we nationalize part of this if it can't be profitable? And then, like, maybe do like a government-owned corporation or something, so we don't have that much influence, but it doesn't necessarily need to be profitable or something like that. Or do we force it to be a non-profit, force the leadership to change up or change the structure or something? These should be part of the discussion, even if they're not the answer. And even if they're not picked as the answer, it's reasonable for it to be part of the discussion. But just the concept of the government having any power at all is literally 1984,
Well, I will say for The Sun, Spencer, is that, like, the kind of person who goes to the gas station to buy newspapers is, like, a subsect of society that's, like ranges from, like, lumpen proletariat to, like, reactionary petit bourgeois, right? Like, the target audience of even the National Post read their news online. Like, they look at it on their phones. They, like,
National Post, that's r/Canada, right?
They look at their stuff online. Toronto Star and Globe and Mail. I feel like the print arm of traditional media has been supplanted completely by their digital arm. Right?
Yeah.
And the exception is, like, lowest common denominator papers like The Sun. Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah.
Like, that sheer difference, if it was like a few here, a few there, but it was extremely notable.
Like, there are obviously other big pieces. Like, the CBC is not a small part of Canadian news. CBC is massive, right? The Globe and Mail is huge. Maclean's is not bad either. Like, there are other ones, and then of course it's not even including the Quebec ones. The Quebec ones are huge as well on their own. Yeah. But you're right. The Toronto Star and the Post are massive. The fact that they're merging is, like, I think Ben said perfectly, wrestling rivals coming together.
Yeah, it's that's out of left field. Toronto Star and Post Media merging.
Okay, one thing. Sorry, I just have to do a quick callback before we continue on, related to housing, which is that I believe Olivia Chow did have much more publicly owned and government-owned or social housing as part of her policy, which will be interesting to watch moving forwards.
Okay, well, we're gonna take a break. We'll reconvene. Shrey has to go. I will stop the recording. And we're back. Okay.
All right, well, I'll warm us up with another callback to something I was talking about earlier that I forgot to say. One of my favorite things about the whole sailboat is that it really goes to show, it's like, the whole idea is that the market will always become the most efficient it is, and that everyone is rational and will act in their best interest.
Yeah.
It's like the fact that sales on boats is the future means that this whole time their profiteering has not only led to, like, a less efficient outcome, but it's also, like, worse for the environment and less profitable because wind is cheaper than gas.
I guess so, yeah. But they were working with imperfect information that a non-market system would have also not had, right? They like the idea of global warming or climate change didn't really exist in 1850 when like the U.S. switched to coal boats or whatever, you know?
Yeah. I always wondered why they didn't keep like a couple sails on the boats or something, at least for if they're going a certain direction.
Well, it's just like they weren't as fast, and that was it. You know, that killed them.
Well, I mean, couldn't you put sails on a coal boat?
I mean,
no.
Because you need a specialized crew to work sails, right? And that's specialized crew that's sitting on the ship working the sails instead of working the more efficient boiler. So just have the boiler crew, you know?
Fair, okay.
Also, like, steamships are much heavier, right? They got iron on them, and they've got, like, the whole boiler room.
Engine.
Yeah.
Does being that close to a boiler, like, in that heat, do you get a tan? Or is this just...
You get, like, rotisserie?
A tan's from UV, isn't it?
Yeah, a tan is from UV, is, like, from radiation damage. The
heat would you, like, get a little color going?
Well, the heat that comes out of boilers is infrared radiation, and the heat that comes off the sun is ultraviolet radiation, which are, like, two different sides of the visible spectrum. They do different things to your body.
You can become crispy.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
But anyways, what's the next segment?
Well, we wanted to talk about Polievre's new look, right? Polievre, Pierre Polievre, everyone's favorite politician, has changed the way he looks. Shrey, you said to appeal to women. Was that your thesis?
Pierre is well, it's not a thesis. It's like confirmed that Pierre is not very popular with the women. The women don't seem to like him, and there's a couple of reasons. I mean, some could say it's because of his policies. Others could say because he has a horrible, swarmy, snobby way of talking. But a lot of people think it's just the way he looks.
Well, I'll show the folks at home what he looked like before and what he looks like now. He kind of went from looking like a middle-aged dad to looking like Seth MacFarlane.
Yeah, he kind of went from a 30-year-old that's still kind of keeping it going.
Yeah.
And he's really aged himself at least 10 years with this move. His eyes kind of look like they're shriveling up like raisins.
Yeah, it's the classic glasses effect where he takes off his glasses and it makes his eyes look smaller. But also, his glasses were covering up his crow's feet, so now he does look older, right? His wrinkles are more prominent and visible.
People say that glasses add like a barrier between you and the rest of the world, so it makes you look like you're less trustworthy. It makes you look more studious and serious for sure, but also makes you look less trustworthy. So they're trying to take away the glasses to make him look more affable and nicer.
I would say he looks less affable now. He looks like a Mormon missionary.
Also, if you notice, when he left his suits and ties and went for the more, sports blazer tech kind of evil look.
Yeah.
Which was interesting. I don't think the black and black is my personal take.
No, too Steve Jobsy. Too Steve Jobsy.
Yeah. But hopefully, we'll see over the next few weeks if women suddenly start liking him more.
It kind of reminds me of George Bush a little bit in this picture.
The second
Which one?
Yeah, I don't know. I can't really put my finger on it, but there's just something about it that feels a little George Bush-core.
Well, he looks friendly in kind of a dopey way, whereas before he looked friendly in more of a wizened way, I guess, with the glasses.
Also, I'm not sure if it's me, but I feel like he's got tan going on now.
Yeah, and I feel like his hair is less gray. Like, it looks browner. Or maybe it's just the lighting of these two pictures.
His skin looks less white.
Yeah. Maybe he's going for the immigrant vote.
I mean, the other candidate is black, right? So
yeah. Well, one of my favorite Pierre Polievre quotes is his I appeal to urban voters because he's a conservative MP from a metropolitan area. Like, he's an Ottawa MP.
Yeah.
But he's an MP of Carleton, which is the farmland area. It's Greeley, it's Metcalfe. It's the area that's like has a population density of like a person per square kilometer.
But he's technically from one of Canada's biggest cities.
Yeah.
I remember there was a a thing where he was at a certain gas station talking to people, and let me tell you, I've been around that area. I've seen that gas station, and yeah, 1 person per kilometer is about right.
Listen, I live out there, you know? I know what it's like.
Yeah,
I'm so sorry to hear that. Yeah, Bennett, can you say your postal code for anyone listening?
Listen, you could probably just look up the 1 postal code that is in that area.
So, I guess, do we want to address the bring home lower prices for Polievre's policy, or is the Polievre deep dive another episode?
I think we could do a Polievre deep dive closer to a federal election, you know?
Okay, yeah.
I mean, we've done a review of municipal candidates. We might as well do a review of federal candidates when we get to that point.
Every single party, including the ones no one knows about.
Oh, you're right.
Oh,
You're right.
Yeah, I remember as a kid, the parties that get ad space, I think it's on the CBC when they do the election ads, some of those are so niche and hilarious.
I used to, this might be a surprise, but I used to be a big Pirate Party fan, like an unironic Pirate Party fan.
Pirate Party is the pro-software piracy party, right?
Yeah.
I honestly respect.
Because like copyrights do not exist or something like that.
In terms of like meme parties, I certainly admire the Pirate Party more than the Rhino Party, which I have
the Pirate Party is part of like an international organization, right?
Yeah,
and
it is an
like
actual serious political organization, but it is a
and they have like
single
1
issue.
seat.
Yeah, they won seats in Iceland.
Yeah. Which, you know, of all places to have like a naval-based piracy party works really well.
Home of the Vikings, yeah. Makes sense.
Now, Shrey, taking it into Bennett's point, Polievre has the same kind of team behind him for his campaign as Trump, right? Or for his like popularity stuff?
Somewhat. I mean, he has a lot of people who are Harperites.
Okay.
You know, Harperites have still a lot of say in the party. They do have campaign people who learned a lot from Trump, and they do have like Trump, like people who worked on both sides. It is important to remember that the governing organization who takes care of the Republican Party, who takes care of the Conservative Party, is the same.
Yeah.
Right, it's the IDU. And so Stephen Harper, who oversees the IDU, has a lot of say in how the Republicans work, how the Conservatives work in the UK, and Canada, and India, and so forth.
That's interesting because he ran his elections and administration, maybe not policy-wise so different, but very much vibes-wise completely different from Trump and Polievre and the other kind of right-wing populists.
If you see his more recent interviews, Harper has changed a lot.
Oh, I would say, I mean, his whole thing was being kind of an autistic weirdo. Who was like a
Harper, okay.
Yeah, like a right-wing policy wonk, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas Trump and Polievre are almost anti-policy.
Yeah, they just kind of like adopt left-wing talking points and then keep it vague.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that. I would say that Polievre is more heavily policy-based than Trump is. The difference is that Polievre's like, you know, the Ben Shapiro, like, I'm super smart.
That's true,
and I know I'm smart. Versus Trump is like, I'm not smart, but I know what you're talking about.
Well, Trump's thing is that he's a big, beautiful genius who doesn't need policy, you know?
Yeah. But, like, Polievre's got the Ben Shapiro kind of thing. Like, I am smart. I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Look, you really don't need policy when you can just point out that your competitor is ugly. And I think that's one part where Polievre is going to have trouble.
That's actually...
Ben, you don't like Trudeau's look, do you?
Me?
Me?
No, Bennett. Yeah, I remember Bennett and I talking about it.
I don't think he's that attractive. You know what I mean? Like, I certainly get why some people find him attractive. It's because he's a politician who doesn't look like shit, right? Like, he's not. I wouldn't say he's like, if I saw Trudeau, I'd think that's a hot guy, you know. But the fact that he's in politics and doesn't look like a complete dork is why I think he has this reputation for being like a smoke show. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think he's doing just like slightly above average, but in the politics landscape, it's like the reverse cheerleader effect, where the cheerleader effect being that one, like being in a group makes everyone look better. Politicians, it's like everyone so clearly looks so bad, and then he stands out above them.
Yeah.
I mean, politics and politicians are just celebritism for ugly people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So true.
Well, we'll see how Polievre turning slightly more orange helps him.
You think that's what the tan was? An attempt to look orange?
To subconsciously associate him with Trump?
Maybe. I honestly, I would not doubt it.
The thing is with Polievre, though, you're right, Shrey, that he kind of gives a Ben Shapiro vibe, which makes him kind of more similar to Ron DeSantis. right? Like, you wouldn't see... I can't see Pierre Polievre being as funny as Trump, or just, like, outright calling people, like, ugly. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I can see him complaining that food has sugar in it.
Yeah, that's a Ron DeSantis move. Yeah, and I can't see him being like on stage calling Trudeau low energy in a way that's as genuine as Trump calling Jeb Bush low energy or something like that.
No, but he just like pulls a blackface card like every second, right, with Trudeau.
Right, but that's more of a Ben Shapiro debate lord style than
that's true.
The Trump like just ad hominem nonstop.
I mean, they both have a similar background where Polyev, when he was 14, wrote an essay of why he should be Prime Minister of Canada.
Okay. Bad
and
sign.
I feel like...
Red flag.
And like apparently he had like one internship which is not in politics, right? That was for Magna, which is a big auto company.
Yeah.
Didn't he also deliver newspapers as a kid for a bit?
Oh, well, I think he also delivered newspapers, right?
That's how
all five houses on his street.
Yeah. Yeah, listen, you try biking that distance and
But apparently when he was like working at Magna as an intern, and he, by the way, that speech, that essay about how to become why he should be prime minister, that was his application. That's how he got in.
Yeah.
And apparently he used to carpool with another guy for that job. And according to the guy he used to carpool with, every single day Pierre would have a folder of news articles he saved from the day before, and he would go through them and give them his takes on it.
Wow, he's literally me.
Yeah, he's awesome. That's awesome.
I will say the first photo in his Glow Down series, I do like it when Canadian politicians color coordinate to the party. You know what I mean? Like he's wearing kind of a blue tie, kind of a baby blue shirt, a navy blue blazer.
That's actually a huge problem. Yeah. In the book I'm reading about consumerization of Canadian politics, it talks about how Canadians are more likely to color coordinate with their party than Americans are.
I swear I've seen a bunch of pictures with Jagmeet Singh wearing an orange turban, right?
Yep.
Yeah. I actually kind of think it's cute.
Yeah, I do enjoy it. If we're gonna have party-based politics, we may as well have some people who are like repping the color with their fit. I think it's good.
Having some real partisans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you okay, you know what? We'll go to the next segment.
We'll move on. Should we cover international news with our remaining time?
What's
Roseanne Archibald ousting was our next Canadian thing, but we're already about 45 minutes in.
Well, Canada's more important than the rest of the world.
I also don't know if we have enough of a...
Yeah, we don't have much to say about this one other than the funny response to it.
All right, we'll chuck it in next week when we actually read a book.
Yeah. It's about First Nations politics, which you have to tread carefully around. But we'll move on to international news. French police during a traffic stop shot a teenager, which has caused riots to break out across France. The last time an unarmed person was shot by the French police, there were 3 weeks of riots, which did not stop until a state of emergency was declared. So we'll see how this one develops. Macron's government has already been struggling with popularity issues and constant rioting, so I don't see it getting any better for him anytime soon.
Has it? Doesn't he keep winning?
I mean, he keeps winning because protests don't actually do anything. But
he also keeps winning with slimmer and slimmer margins over the same fascist.
Yeah.
So,
like, I'll say
I don't know if I'd say he's winning. He's just losing slightly less, the boogeyman is out of the closet.
How many elections has he actually won? Because only 2, right? He won the first one and then he won the recent one. But in the meantime, he's had the yellow vest protest, he's had the retirement age protest, and now the police brutality riots. Those protests obviously haven't changed anything because, as Mark Fisher said, protests don't actually do anything to that effect, right? But
Well, I'd say, I'm just going to jump in there and honestly say, I think Mark Fisher's was more strictly towards protests, and not necessarily towards riot protests, which the French seem to be doing more of. And it's still like a little debatable, but it seems to have at least a little more than
it has at least a material effect, unlike the pink hat protest from the early Trump years. But
Well,
I will say he wins slimmer and slimmer margins in his 2 elections. He's trended closer to beating girl Hitler. You know what I mean? Like he's winning by like 20 votes, and just carrying Paris is like getting him to defeat Le Pen as she sweeps the countryside.
as someone who doesn't know much about foreign news,
Yeah.
right? Didn't under Hollande and all the other presidents of France, they also had like the same number of protests and riots?
France has a lot of protests, right? Like the previous one that I mentioned for police brutality was in like 2005, which was under like Sarkozy or something. Not or Hollande, not Macron. But I feel like Macron's had a particularly bad go of it because of his particular party policies, which is like En Marche, an openly very neoliberal party. I mean, like France, these are nothing close to like the most important French protests, the '68 protest, which we're like 55 years out from. But
What about the 1796 protests? I heard those were pretty big.
well, I mean, for the Fifth Republic, the most important protest was the 1968 riots, right? And,
Right.
Nowadays, we see less important riots, but I feel like Macron has had a nonstop flow of protests in a way that kind of his predecessors didn't so much have.
Now, one thing I found interesting about this protest is it seems that the reception is a little different, and I'm not sure if you know where that might come from. I know that the last, like the retirement age protest, there were some people saying, "Oh, just work harder, dog. I swear it'll work out for you."
Yeah.
But most of the people seem to be saying, "Oh, like we'll stand solidarity. They should be fighting for their rights and whatever." This one doesn't seem to be the case, and people seem to be saying, "Oh, they're totally just burning down their country and stuff like that." And I'm not sure if this is, I mean, being a police brutality thing, whether there's a slight race/immigrant angle to everything. I'm also not sure. Oh yeah, there's also one comment I have, which is about looting, which is people seem to hate looting, but they're also the people that are just like, "Oh, you shouldn't protest. You should go over like rich people's finances and what they actually care about," which is looting. Like that accomplishes that.
Well, I would say looting is different in the sense that it targets largely the petite bourgeoisie, not the bourgeoisie, right? Looting affects storefronts, which are usually owned by franchisees or by small business people. And while I'd say socialists in general aren't sympathetic to the plight of the petite bourgeoisie, the general public is, right?
Yeah.
There's kind of the cult of the small business owner in general politics.
Well, they can see themselves.
Yeah, the local business owner is
Yeah.
the hero in the fight.
So, but the thing is, like rich people that most people hate, like that, the rich people that I'd say most people resent are billionaires, right? Who are like real bourgeoisie, who don't own storefronts, but rather have kind of like more complex capital investment portfolios or something. But like in the abstract, looting would hurt those people too. Significantly less than the petite bourgeoisie, but still would, because it does lead to, interruption of commerce and
I also figured there's probably insurance on this stuff, wouldn't there be? Which would mean it goes right at insurance. Well, I guess insurance companies then up their rates and it trickles back.
Yeah, but it definitely hurts. I would say in the long term, the insurance companies more than the petite bourgeoisie who are insured, right? But there are certainly members of that class that aren't insured who live more precipitously. Who I think people are upset by them being targeted.
Yeah, because I think if they looted the homes or the companies directly of the very, very, very rich and not like franchises and storefronts, it would make more sense.
Yeah.
So like boss kidnapping.
Yeah, that would be based, which I think the French have done before. That is definitely a protest tactic French unions have used. But also, another thing is kind of a selfishness angle of not the looting. That looting is selfish, but rather that the universal support for the retirement age protest, I think, comes from the fact that it affects all of society, like all workers and laborers. So not just immigrant communities who might be brutalized by the police. So like white French people are materially affected by the retirement age raising. They aren't necessarily materially affected by police brutality on the daily or weekly like immigrant communities might be, right?
Yeah.
So
It's outside of the environment.
Yeah, it's outside of their experience. It's not something that they necessarily sympathize with.
This might be just me pulling something straight out of nowhere, so don't take it with a massive grain of salt, but do take it with a little grain of salt. This has a lot of reminiscence of what happened with the BLM protest, right?
Yeah.
It was an immigrant. It was a minority kid who was shot unarmed. Of course, the BLM protests were not like that, but it was police brutality on an immigrant or a minority person. Versus a 67-year-old retirement age one, which was exclusively French. Like, no one else in the world cared, right? It was like a French thing specifically. Do you think that people are just seeing this as like a foreign kind of movement that's co-opted, or do you think people in France generally think of this as a French movement?
Well, I wouldn't say police brutality is like a local movement, right? Like, I would say this won't be exported from France because France isn't like a cultural giant like it used to be, like the U.S. is now. Right?
Yeah.
When the U.S. had BLM protests, there was definitely international solidarity, but that was because everyone consumes American media, right? Everyone is always tuned into what the U.S. is doing because it's the imperial core. It's where the decisions are made for the rest of the world, right? So when BLM happened, you had like solidarity marches all the way in Japan and stuff. Whereas with France is not a cultural hegemon. People don't follow French news unless they're like a weirdo, right? So there's going to be less outcry, I think. There might be like a statement by the BLM quote-unquote official organization in the US, but other than that, I don't see like Americans taking to the streets to protest French police brutality.
Yeah, no, I'm actually quite curious. Do you think they did anything? The BLM people?
I don't know. I'm just guessing that what most we'll see from them is a statement of solidarity rather than a call to protest.
Yeah, at least the website, the news part of the website doesn't really talk about it unless I'm missing something.
In terms of BLM, I think what it did show is that, like, these types of protests on this topic are distinctly getting bigger and bigger. So even if it like didn't necessarily accomplish any of its goals, as it keeps happening, like more and more extreme measures and more violence against, the state when things happen will become more accepted over time until either something gives and there's actually institutional change, like real change, or there's like the ultimate crackdown and then it's a let's really find out moment.
I don't think so. Like there was a huge protest. I hate keep talking about the American stuff, but like the Rodney King protests were massive.
Yeah, the LA riot.
Yeah, the LA riots, the birthplace of the infamous rooftop Koreans and all that.
Well, let's not get into that.
It was a huge protest, and it did make some small but important changes to the police system. But when the BLM protest came back, it wasn't like 1,000 years ago. It wasn't like 100 years ago. It was like 30 years ago. But we have video of that.
Also, the LA riot was also far more destructive than any BLM protest. There were actual deaths at the LA riot.
Oh yeah, well, I mean the inability to do violence as a form of protest, like that has been new post 9/11. Really, that's when they crack down on any and all destruction of property for violence. So if you're looking back to, further back than 9/11, they would almost certainly be significantly more destructive. And that's also, if you push back beyond, 1980 or anything, that also comes to a different time where people were able to reasonably push for institutional change instead of just trying to get more entrepreneurship in certain populations or something like that. So I think we're kind of in a weird phase where we're seeing that the way things have been going, like the way protests have worked over the last 20 years, clearly had not been giving the material bonuses that we would hope to get from such massive movements. And I have a feeling we're going to start seeing certain older things come back. But I could be wrong.
Interesting. So you think that we should not be looking at things before 9/11 with the same gaze as you do after 9/11?
Well, yeah.
Before 9/11, you would literally, people would say, oh, you shouldn't develop this side of the mountain into a ski thing, and then the owner would say, oh, I will, and people would just burn down the whole resort. Like, that was and they wouldn't get grilled for it. The
Right.
people would just say, okay, yeah.
Like Shrey, contrast the Wet'suwet'en crisis to the Oka crisis. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
okay.
There was definitely in the West a deliberate use of the 9/11 tragedy to expand the security state with the popular support for that in the wake of it, right?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, that's actually a really good one because the Oka crisis was very vicious. There was actual deaths and everything, and
Like there was
no
actual,
one died.
it was like a militia against
Yep.
the army, right? Whereas
Yep.
Wet'suwet'en is just like small bands blocking some infrastructure.
Yeah, well, I mean, there was like 1,100 people arrested in the Ferry Creek protest, which happened, I think, last year or so.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was very, very peaceful, and people were still very much like, arrest all of them and all that.
Yeah. If there was another Oka crisis, I think the RCMP would be sending in like attack helicopters or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Interesting.
All right. Well, we're coming up on the end of today's episode, and I think Shrey, you have to go. It's 4:41. So we'll see you all next week. Thank you for tuning in. Goodbye.